Mohenjo-daro, around 2600 BC. Imagine this place. Wide streets of burnt brick, a well-thought-out sewage system, granaries, markets. One of the first genuinely urban cities on Earth. Heat, dust, the smell of the Indus River mixed with something sharp, warm, almost aggressive. Scientists have been excavating this city since the 1920s, and among the finds are stone mortars with traces of turmeric, ginger, and garlic. Not just spices. Precisely that combination which today the whole world calls the base of curry. For 1,600 years ago, before Rome, before the Greek city-states, before most things we are used to calling ancient, this is where the story begins that almost no one tells honestly. Because curry is not a dish. It is not a sauce. It is not even a flavor. Curry is the most successful culinary invention in human history, which managed to conquer the world twice. First through trade routes, and then through the colonial apparatus. And one of the main paradoxes of this story is that the word curry was not invented by Indians. They do not use it at all. This word is a product of misunderstanding, colonial simplification, and, strangely enough, culinary genius that works both ways. But let us start with the legend. Because without it, it would not be fair. There is a story that the word curry itself comes from the Tamil kari, which means something like sauce or gravy for rice. According to the legend, when Portuguese traders landed on the shores of the Malabar coast in the early 16th century, local residents offered them food. The food was swimming in a thick, fragrant sauce. The Portuguese asked, "What is this?" They were answered, "Curry." The Portuguese wrote it down. Then the British appeared and wrote it down again, this time in their own way. And the word stuck to everything at once. To any dish with gravy, to any spice mix, to the entire South Asian cuisine wholesale. Historians will say that this is a simplification, and they are right. But there is still truth in this legend. Contact, misunderstanding, a new name. That is how cultural exchange is born. And now, the facts. And they are much more interesting than the legend. Those finds in Mohenjo-daro that I mentioned are not guesses. In 2013, researchers from the University of Washington published an analysis of food residues on ceramic fragments and teeth of skeletons from the Indus Valley. Turmeric, ginger, mustard, all three together. This means that people purposefully mixed spices as early as the 3rd millennium BC. Not by accident, not one by one, precisely as a mixture, because flavor arises at the intersection. This is not a culinary coincidence. This is a conscious system that is more than 4,000 years old. This is an important detail. In India, there was never a single curry. This is a fundamental point. In India, there are hundreds of traditions, hundreds of regional combinations, thousands of family recipes. In the north, thick, creamy sauces based on dairy products, descendants of Mughlai cuisine brought by conquerors from Central Asia in the 16th century. In the south, thin, sour, fiery raisins and sambars with tamarind and 30 types of pepper, which are cooked in coconut oil and eaten with rice, never with bread. In the west, in Goa, vindaloo, which Goans themselves cook with vinegar because that is exactly how the Portuguese taught them to make it, blending Indian spices with the European technique of marinating. In the east, in Bengal, fish curries with mustard oil and fenugreek seeds, which are unlike anything else. Calling all of this by one word is approximately like calling all European sauces by the word sauce. Technically correct. Essentially, a disaster. But the British did precisely that. And here the story becomes truly dark. The East India Company appeared in 1600. At first, trade. Spices, fabrics, tea. Then, politics. Then, the army. By the middle of the 18th century, the company managed vast territories of Hindustan with its own troops, courts, and prisons. It was a private corporation with state rights. And it was precisely this corporation that became the main channel through which curry reached Europe. British officials, officers, traders lived in India for years. Ate local food. Grew accustomed to it. Returned home and missed the flavor. In 1784, the first restaurant specializing in Indian cuisine opened in London. It was called the Hindustan Coffee House, and it was founded by Dean Mahomed, an Indian from Patna who had moved to Britain. This was a revolution. Quiet, spicy, without a single gunshot. Dean Mahomed is a completely underrated figure. He was born in 1759, served in the British Army in India, immigrated to Ireland, then to England, wrote the first book in English authored by an Indian, The Travels of Dean Mahomed in 1794, and opened that very restaurant on Portman Square in London. The menu consisted of dishes in the Indian style, with hookah pipes and couches. The restaurant, unfortunately, went bankrupt after 2 years. The London public was not yet ready, but the seed had fallen into the soil. Dean Mahomed did not give up. He moved to Brighton, opened Indian-style bath procedures, and became a masseur to King George IV himself. A man whom history could have forgotten turned out to be the first Indian entrepreneur in Britain. This, too, is part of the story of curry. In parallel, something else was happening. British housewives wanted to cook like in India without having the ingredients, the knowledge, or, frankly speaking, an understanding that Indian cuisine is not a single recipe. And then someone came up with a solution that changed everything. Someone packaged spices into one bag, named it curry powder, and sold it as a universal key to the mystery of the East. Hannah Glass mentioned a recipe for curry the Indian way as early as 1747 in her famous cookbook, The Art of Cookery. It was a mixture of turmeric, ginger, and pepper. No complexity, no nuance. 1 spoon, and you are supposedly in India. Indian cooks, upon learning about this invention, reacted in much the same way an Italian chef would react to a universal Italian sauce in a packet. That is to say, with horror. But it was precisely this simplified version that conquered the world. Curry powder, a mixture of turmeric, coriander, cumin, fenugreek, chili pepper, and several other components, became an industrial product. By the 1880s, it was being produced by the ton. The C&B Company, Cross and Blackwell, supplied it throughout the British Empire. Soldiers in Africa, officials in Malaysia, traders in Australia. Everywhere the British flag reached, curry reached as well, in a tin can with Latin letters. It was the globalization of spices, packed into a colonial suitcase. And here is the dark side, the very one that feels uncomfortable to pass over in silence. Curry spread along with the empire, and the empire rested on forced labor. Turmeric plantations in the Madras Presidency worked on peasants indebted to the company for money they could never pay back. Pepper from the Malabar coast was harvested by workers whose villages the British administration taxed in such a way that people had to sell their labor. The system was elegant in its cruelty. The spices that gave Europe a sense of exoticism and comfort were produced under conditions that had nothing in common with either. There was another mechanism as well, indentured labor. After the abolition of slavery in the British Empire in 1833, plantation owners in the Caribbean, Africa, and Fiji needed a labor force. They found it in India. Millions of people signed contracts under which they left to work overseas for 5 years. Formally, voluntarily. In fact, without a real choice and without a real right to return. They carried seeds, spices, and recipes with them. And curry traveled with them. Trinidadian curry, Fijian curry, South African curry. These are not tourist borrowings. These are traces of human tragedy coded into food. This is not a reason to refuse curry, but it is part of its history. An honest part of it. Meanwhile, in India itself, curry lived its own, completely parallel life. And here I like one detail in particular. Chili pepper, the main spice in most Indian curries, appeared in India only in the late 15th to early 16th century. It was brought by the Portuguese from the New World. That is, chili in Indian cuisine is a newcomer, a foreigner, an immigrant. Before its appearance, Indian heat was provided by long pepper and black pepper, a completely different flavor, a different texture, a different intensity. But today it is impossible to imagine vindaloo, sambar, or most curries without chili. Indian cuisine took an American product, made it its own, and now it seems as ancient as India itself. That is what culinary culture is. It is not a museum, it is a living organism. It digests the foreign and makes it native faster than textbooks can be written. After 1947, when India gained independence, a new phase of curry history began, the diaspora phase. Hundreds of thousands of Indian and Pakistani families immigrated to Great Britain. They needed work. Many opened restaurants, often in cheap premises, in working-class neighborhoods, for a clientele that wanted to eat quickly and cheaply. Thus was born British curry, an independent culinary tradition, not entirely Indian and not entirely British. Tikka masala, which today in Britain is called a national dish, is a dish invented, in all likelihood, precisely in these restaurants. There is a legend about a chef from Glasgow who in the 1970s added tomato soup with yogurt to chicken tikka at the request of a customer who complained that the dish was too dry. Historians will say, it is not known for certain, but the dish exists, and it is as British as it is Indian. By the 1990s, more than 8,000 curry houses, Indian restaurants, were operating in Great Britain. They provided jobs for 100,000 people and brought more than £2 billion a year into the economy. Curry surpassed fish and chips in popularity. This is not a metaphor. This is official statistics from the Ministry of Trade. A former colonial product became a national symbol of the country that used to export it. History loves such turns. And now science. Because behind this flavor stands something more than just pleasure. Turmeric, the backbone of any curry, contains curcumin. This is a polyphenolic compound with powerful anti-inflammatory properties. For millennia, Ayurvedic medicine used turmeric for joint pain, digestive issues, and wounds. Nobody knew why it worked. It just worked. Modern biochemistry explained. Curcumin suppresses the activity of NF-κB, a molecular switch that triggers inflammatory processes in the body. This is not folk medicine. This is a real mechanism confirmed by hundreds of clinical studies. Curcumin also exhibits antioxidant properties, neutralizing free radicals that damage cell membranes and DNA. But there is a nuance that I especially like. Curcumin on its own is poorly absorbed by the human body. Its bioavailability is extremely low. It breaks down rapidly in the gastrointestinal tract. However, if it is consumed together with piperine, the active component of black pepper, the absorption of curcumin increases by 2,000%. Not 20. Not 200. 2,000. And what does any classic curry do? It mixes turmeric with black pepper. The cooks of the Indus Valley were doing this 4,000 years ago. They did not know about piperine. They did not know about bioavailability. They simply knew that it tasted better this way. And as it turned out, it was healthier too. That is what is called empirical knowledge. You do not understand the mechanism, but the mechanism works. Ginger in curry contains gingerol, a substance that stimulates digestive enzymes and accelerates intestinal motility. In a hot climate, where food spoiled quickly, this was not a luxury. It was protection. Hot chili pepper causes a release of endorphins, neurotransmitters responsible for the sensation of joy and satisfaction. The brain interprets the burning sensation as pain and responds to it with its own painkiller. Getting used to spicy food is literally getting used to one's own endorphins. That is why lovers of spicy food say that they cannot stop. They are not exaggerating. It is physiology. Coriander and cumin contain terpenes, aromatic compounds that stimulate the production of gastric juice and bile. That is, curry literally prepares the digestive system for work even before the first piece reaches the stomach. The smell itself is part of the dish, a functional part. Indian culinary masters called this tadka, frying spices in oil at the very beginning of cooking, when the entire kitchen smell changes in seconds. Spices open up in hot oil. Terpenes evaporate. The kitchen changes its smell. The body begins to prepare for food. This is not a decoration. It is a signal. An ancient, precise, biologically grounded signal. For 1,000 years. Mohenjo-daro. Mortars made of stone. People who knew nothing about curcumin, nor piperine, nor gingerol, but who found the right combination through trial, taste, and memory passed from mother to daughter, from cook to apprentice, from village to city, from city to empire. Curry is not a recipe. It is an archive. A living, spicy archive of human experience distributed across billions of kitchens. Every family that cooks its own curry adds a new entry to this archive. And here is what is important in the end. Curry did not conquer the world because it was imposed by force. Yes, colonial routes played a role. It would be dishonest to deny that. But no colonizer forced British workers in the 1970s to go to a curry house every Friday. Nobody forced the Japanese to create their own version. Japanese curry, which today is eaten in the land of the rising sun almost more often than sushi, with its mild, almost sweet flavor, completely unlike the Indian original, but honest in its own way. Nobody ordered the Thais, Malays, Caribbeans, Peruvians to create their own variations. They did it because the spice mixture landed where a similar logic already lived. Warmth, aroma, depth. Curry found its people. Everywhere. The best ideas work precisely this way. They do not conquer. They find. This was another dossier of the Culinary Archive. If you want the stories to continue, subscribe to the channel. Every week we open a new dossier. See you in the archive.